Hey, welcome back, guys. In this episode, we're going to work on the player controller and base class. So let's get started. First, we're going to want to create a new C++ class, and it will extend the player controller class. Let's just call this like demo player controller class, and it'll go in public slash player. Okay, let's just open up the header file and add a new protected function on possess. Okay, let's open up the CPV file and create our definition for our onPossess function. Well, let's just make sure, oh, got the name wrong. So onPossess is going to take in a pawn. We'll want to call the super version of it. Next, we'll want to get the player state. Then once we make sure that it's not null, we'll want to get our ability system component and initialize the ability actor info to be our pawn that we just possessed. We're also going to have to include our state class and the ability system component header file. Alright, so that's pretty much everything for our player controller. In the sample project, there's a lot of functions in here for kind of like updating and initializing the UI, but we're not going to make the UI until, a few episodes down the line. So for now, I don't know, I'm just going to add a comment. Like add HUD stuff. Okay, now that we have a pretty basic player controller class, we'll want to create our actual player class finally. It's going to extend our base character class that we made. I think it was like a demo character base. Yep. We'll call it demo player character. We'll put this in public character player, I guess. Go ahead and create that. All right, let's open up our header file and start by defining the constructor. It's going to take in an object initializer. We'll want function to bind basically functionality to input. So set up player input component. All right, we'll also want a function that we'll call when we're possessed. And basically here's where we're gonna like set up our pointers that keep track of our ability system component and attribute set. All right, next we'll want a couple of just basic components like a camera boom and a follow camera. We're also going to want to make a couple of U functions to get information about our camera boom. Demo. We'll call this get starting camera boom. And we want this function basically so we can get the, well, obviously, as the name says, to get the starting boom arm length, but we're going to want to use this in certain cases where we actually modify the camera boom. So one example would be, say you want to cast an ability and it has like a very wide area of effect. You might want to like increase the arm boom length to like, so that way you can see more of the map before you cast your ability. But then once you've cast it, you want to set the arm length back to the starting value, which is why this function will come in handy. But anyway, we'll also want to define a function that gets the starting location for the same reason I just said, in case we change that. Okay. Okay. So now for our protected section, we're going to want to define a U property that is blueprint read only, category of demo camera. And this is actually going to be our camera boom. And we'll want one for our actual camera too. Okay, we're also going to want to make another property for the starting camera boom arm length. I'm just going to copy that, change this to starting camera boom arm length, and starting camera boom location. Okay, I also forgot we want to make these visible anywhere. Alright, we're also going to want to make a couple of properties for like looking around and stuff, because we're going to remove the third person controller we started with, and we're going to use this class instead to move the player. So we'll want a base turn rate. I'll make this 45. And we'll want a base lookup rate 45 as well. And they're both going to be blueprint read write, edit anywhere. Okay. Okay, now we're just going to want a couple of functions to actually look around. Okay, we'll want function to bind the ability system component input, and likewise we'll want a variable to keep track of whether or not we've already bounded the ability system component input. We'll also want reference to the dead tag, and we want to override the begin play function. Finally, we'll want to add a virtual void on rep player state. Okay, so let's go to our CPP file now and start filling these in. Okay, so in our constructor, copy that over. We're going to want to set up our just like basic components like the camera boom. Call it just camera boom. We'll set up the attachment to our root node. We'll set to use pawn control rotation, and we'll want to set the relative location to be behind the player, I believe. Let's just say like 70. Okay. I think that means we'll also want to include the header file for the camera boom. So that's going to be under components. Nope. Game framework spring harm component.h. Let's just fix this typo here, and we can make our follow camera. Do we want to call it follow camera? I guess so. Okay, we will set up attachment to our boom and make our field of view equal to, say, 80. Alright, we'll want to also set our collision response Alright, cool. Okay, that means we need to import the camera component. We also need the capsule component. Okay, and it looks like I just typed that. Cool. Okay, now let's just set up some defaults for our mesh. First, we're gonna want to set visibility based anim tick option to be, oh, one sec, I cannot type and speak at the same time sometimes, but we're gonna want to set it to tick pose and refresh bones. We'll also want to set collision enabled to no collision. Finally, I want to set collision profile name to no collision. Alright, we're also going to want to set our AI controller class to be the one we made. I think in last episode, I think it was it a, shoot, what do we call it? A player AI controller. Static class. I think that means we also need to import that. That's going to be under AI, player controller. Okay. And we'll also want to greater dead tag. Oops, forgot AI controller class. There we go. Okay, so in the interest of time, I'm just gonna paste these lines of code in because I think they're kind of straightforward. It's basically just setting up like the inputs. Okay, so like it's just binding the axis, move forward, move right, look up, all this, which we will have to define in our project settings, but we'll do that in a second. Wait, did we not define a move forward? Oh, I just can't type. Okay. Forward. There we go. Cool. And we also need to call our bind ASC input function, just like that. We're also going to call this function in our onRep player state because we might have some race conditions there, but we'll get to that. Next, let's go to our possessed by function and start filling this out. We're going to want to call the super version of it first, then get our player state. Shoot, what do we call it? My memory is not great. Okay, a demo player state. Got it. Oh, that's what I was typing. Okay. All right, let's just go ahead and import that too. Might as well. I think it was under player demo player state. Okay. Then once we make sure that it is not null, we'll want to set our ability system component variable. Okay. So yeah, this is when we're finally assigning or creating that pointer to our ability system component in the player state. Okay. We also want to initialize our ability actor info. And create our pointer to our attribute set. One thing to note, we are setting this twice. As if you can recall, we did this in our player controller class. The reason we're doing it again is because AI might not have a controller, which is why we're doing it here. If we don't think an AI is going to control our this character, then we don't really need this. But then we also didn't have to make the AI class before. And the sample project, it has this, so might as well include it as well and see what we can do with it. Maybe we can make like a basic AI that controls our player as well. But for now, let's just keep going. It's gonna forcibly set the dead tag count to 0 and set our max health, or set our health to like the max value, and we want to do the same for mana. We're going to want to add our startup effects and add our character abilities. Okay, we also want to include all of our header files. So first off, it goes in character, player, character. Also want to include our player, player controller, and our ability system component. No, it was called character ability system component. Oh, whoops. Just character abilities, character ability system component. And now we can start filling in these getters. This is just going to return our camera boom, follow camera, starting camera boom length, and our location. Okay, cool. Okay, let's just fix this as well, because I can't type. That should fix that error. And in our begin play function, we'll just call the super version. We're going to want to set our starting camera boom arm length, the camera boom, target arm length. And then our location is going to just be camera boom dot get relative location. It looks like this error hasn't gone away, so I think that means I misspelled. Yep. There we go. I did misspell this as well. Jeez, I cannot type. Alright, so for pretty much all of these, we're going to want to check if we're live first, and then add controller pitch input. For this one, we're going to want to multiply this by our base lookup rate and our delta time. Okay. There we go. Similarly, in our term, we're going to want to add controller yaw input and do the same, but it's going to be yaw instead, and it's going to be our base turn rate. And if you're wondering why we have like two very similar looking functions, but one applies like the rate, basically one of them is for mouse and one of them, I think this one's for mouse, and then this one is for a gamepad. So anyway, for a move forward, we're just going to add movement input. Okay. Forward vector. Okay. And for move right, we're going to want to get right vector. Alright, we also need to include the header file for that math library. Kismet slash Kismet math library. And yep, our errors have gone away. Alright, so this function is basically going to do the same thing as what's done in the possessed by, except it's going to be slightly different. Just for simplicity's sake, I'm just going to copy and paste this, but I think ideally you want to avoid duplicate code, so you might want to just make this kind of like a helper function or something. But for now, actually, you might as well just go ahead and do it. So I'll just call this demo player character. What should I do? Like initialize. Well, it's like initialize starting values. I don't know. This is a horrible name, but just gonna get rid of that. We're gonna want to check if it exists. Set our health and mana. Alright, that looks good. Let me declare it in our header file. Wow, my IntelliSense is very slow for some reason. But let's go ahead and declare it here. Okay, and then if you look, we copied this code from, oh, you know what, actually, let's remove this and we will pass this value in. Let's change the header file as well. Okay, and then in, oops, function here, we'll just call it like that. And that should run these lines of code. So all we want to do in addition to that is add our startup effects and our character abilities. Okay, and here I'll just make it smaller. And then in our onPlayer state, we're going to do something similar. Let me just copy that. Okay. So call the super version of this function and get our player state, call our initialize starting values, but we're also going to want to bind our ability system component input and call the initialize attributes. And yeah, that'll be pretty much it. Now, if you're wondering why we're doing things like multiple times, well, we might have some race conditions and we have discrepancies between the server and the client. So for example, this only gets called on the client versus, this function getting called in our possessed by function. This only gets called on the server. So yeah, that's why we want to make sure it gets called in both places. All right, so let's just finish this up. If we haven't bound our input yet, and our ability system component is valid, and our input component is also valid, we're going to actually bind ability activation to input component. Okay. Oops. What do we call this? Demo ability ID. That's right. Demo ability ID. And yeah, I'll explain this in a second. I can't really type all this out and also explain. Okay. And finally, we just set this to true because we finally bound the ability system component input. But basically, this is telling our ability system component that when we want to confirm our target, we're gonna map it to our like confirm enum item here. Same with cancel, and then the rest will just go get lumped into this demo ability ID enum. So from there, if we define inputs, so say for example I made a spell called like fireball, right? Then I'll have to define that in my inputs in my project settings, and then it'll automatically get like bound to our ability system component. So then when we press the key, it'll try to map, that key to that ability. Okay, so with that out of the way, let's just go back into our editor, go to our project settings, add a new input. We'll call it, just for testing purposes, I'll call it fireball, and we'll bind it to, what should I say? Maybe my F key. Okay. Close this out. And finally, I'm going to close the editor actually so we can compile the solution again. Alright, looks like we got some errors, so let's just try to fix them one by one. This one is probably just because we did not import the header file. So where's our state? There it is. Yep. All right, paste that in there. Okay, next up, we forgot to call the super version of our constructor. Okay, let's try building again, and we'll see it finally succeeded. So let's go ahead and open up our editor. All right, so first let's go to content, create a new folder here, call this demo, and here put in a new folder called characters, and finally one for our hero, or we'll just call it player. Okay, now let's try to find our demo player character class, create a blueprint from it. Let's call this bp slash player character, and we'll put it in the folder we just made. Okay, cool. Now if we go to our mesh, let's try to find our mannequin here. Okay, there we go. Okay, we also need to rotate him so he's looking forward, just like that. I'm gonna save that and compile. Now if we go to our game mode, oh, let's edit that, and we'll set it to use our new demo player controller, and what do we call it? I think it was this one. Okay, compile, and let's see what happens. Nothing. But yeah, don't worry, all we have to do is update our project settings, input, and fill these out to match the input axes that we have here. All right, move forward, move right, look up rate, turn, and turn rate. All right, so I think we can just delete all those and let's make some new ones. So move forward, it's gonna be W. All right, here's the final configuration for the inputs, so feel free to just pause and copy it, whatever you want to do. Okay, but now if we play the game, we should at least be able to move. And I'm not sure why the turning isn't working, so let's figure that out. Alright, so if you pull up the code, you'll see that our turn logic makes sure that we're alive first before being able to turn. I think in hindsight, we should probably also make sure that we're alive before we can move, just to be consistent, right? But basically that's why we're not able to turn. So now look, if I add this code, we should not be able to move either. But I'm not going to show you, just again, interest of time. But the reason is because if you go to our character, class defaults, default attributes, see there's none. So all of our health is basically just like 0. And remember, to check if we're alive, we have to make sure that our health is greater than 0, which means we have to create our attribute set for our player character. Okay, so to do that, we go to Tools, New, no, not C++ actually. Oh, wait. Let's go to our characters, player, create a new blueprint class. It will be of type game effect. What is it? Gameplay effect. There we go. And we'll call this BP player attributes. And actually, let's call this GE because it's a game effect. All right. And if we go to class defaults, you'll see modifiers. All right, so here's where we're going to want to define our attribute. Okay, so let's click on add, and we will first start with our character level. There we go. We're going to override the value. I'm going to set it to a value of 1. these source tags and target tags can just stay empty, and that's pretty much it. So now we'll do the same thing for health and mana. Health, max health, and let's say our max health is going to be 100. Override, override, both. Actually, let's set it equal to 0 just to make sure that it sets it to our max health like we wanted it to. Alright, and let's do the same thing. Same thing for mana, excuse me. So you see how this is using the tag system to find our attributes. It's kind of cool. Let's say mana is 200. I'll just make that 0 as well. Let's save that. And now we go back to our player blueprint and set it to our player attributes blueprint class we just made. Let's compile that. Compile, save, and let's try now. Alright, still nothing. Okay, so let's go back to our code and let's move this initialize attributes call into this helper function that we made. Because I realized we were only calling initialize attributes on this function. So I think that's why it wasn't initializing our attributes correctly, and that's why like the health is just 0. So let's just try rebuilding. Open up the editor again, and let's try now. All right, yeah, and we can move around and look around. Awesome. Now, one thing that's weird is if I move my mouse up, I look down, and if you move the mouse down, you look up. So that's another thing we'll have to fix. Let's just go to our project settings, go to input, and it looks like I messed up here. This should be a -1, like that. So now let's just try again. And yep, everything works as expected. Alright, so before I log off, I just want to show you something kind of cool because I know we've been doing a lot of C++ programming, which kind of sucks. Well, I mean, I like it, but I don't know if you guys do. So let's just make a quick poison effect. I just want to show you how quickly you can make these gameplay effects now that we've done all the setup. Alright, so let's make the duration be 5 seconds, and the effect itself is going to reduce the health by, let's say, 20 every second. So if we set period to 1, it's going to execute every second for the 5 seconds. And let's toggle this off. That way it doesn't take away the health, like the 20 health right on start. All right, let's compile that. And if we go to our player character, add the poison we just made to our array of startup abilities. Let's compile that and hit play. And you can see here our health is going down every second. And look, right now I can move, but then once it hits 0, I can no longer move, which means we died. So yeah, right off the bat, you could see how simple that was. I mean, we made that poison effect in less than a minute, and it was pretty effective, I'd say. If you wanted to take it one step further, you could actually add gameplay cues, which is basically some sort of effect like particles or sounds or whatever you want, and you can actually kind of like show that the person or character or whatever is poisoned. We'll probably delve deeper into that later in the series, but I just wanted to show you kind of a sneak peek of how all the setup that we've done is finally going to start paying off. And we can start doing some interesting stuff. Another quick fix is to go into our blueprint, click on the mesh, and add the many animation blueprint. Let's compile, save that, hit play, and now he's not going to be T-posing anymore, which is kind of nice. So yeah, unfortunately, I don't think it came with a sideways walking animation. The third person controller just rotates the mesh, I believe, which is why you're seeing this behavior. But maybe we'll fix that later on in the series. Okay, well that pretty much concludes this video. In summary, we finally finished the player class, which lets us move and look around. As you saw, we can apply gameplay effects to the character. We can start giving them abilities, which we'll probably get into very soon. I think we're in a good spot. And yeah, I'm excited for what's to come. Okay, well, if you found this video to be helpful or if you want to see more of the series, please leave a like and subscribe. I'm brand new to this, so honestly, if leaving a comment with some sort of feedback would be really helpful to me. I want to try to make these videos more engaging or more fun or whatever I can to make it more palatable. Because I know those first few videos were probably a lot of C++, but hopefully now that we have a solid foundation and we kind of got a lot of the setup out of the way, we can start doing more interesting stuff. So anyway, I'll see you in the next one. Thanks.